issues that providers bring forth. We are here and we exist to help the county boards in all that they do. Our vision for the system is just that we have a strong, connected Ohio. We can go to the next slide, please, where, people, am I able to control? I don't know. Okay. So the next slide with OACB's vision is, we've talked for so many years about this system.
I think I did it, Jeremy. I think I did this. I hit the arrow and it changed.
Okay, I'll see if I can do it, and then if not, we'll go to you. But we talk a lot about person-centered planning, and we have a long way to go in terms of a connected, inclusive Ohio. And I think the pandemic has really kind of put a spotlight on services, and there are a lot of conversations going on about what service looks like moving forward. And so, yeah, so Teresa, I don't think I'll be able to change the slides. So, so Teresa has asked me to spend 1 hour to meet your training requirements, and I'm sorry we could not help in service-wise in terms of getting some of these requirements waived during the in terms of the pandemic. But Teresa asked me to talk about the 2020 agenda, highlighting priorities for the Department of Developmental Disabilities and for the OACB. And ideally, those align. And so, just a reminder, the Department of DD is the state regulatory agency. OACB is a private sector, not-for-profit trade association that is supported through the dues of every county board in Ohio. Teresa has asked me to spend 1 hour just talking again about priorities. And so I'd like to keep this moving at a very nice clip. And if I were there in person, more than anything, I would want to keep this very conversational. So any way in which we can do that. And so Teresa, I think we can go perhaps to the next slide. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to very briefly highlight, and this would be redundant for Linda and Tom, but I am just going to very briefly highlight our 4 pillars of what we do on behalf of county boards, and then I'm going to segue into our top priorities for 2020. There is a chat, so if you have a question, if that will perhaps work, I will try to stay cognizant of that. First and foremost, we advocate on behalf of county boards. The state legislature in Columbus, the feds and Congress in Washington, D.C., all have a lot of say. Believe it or not, even though it's a locally funded system, all the rules and regulations are promulgated at the state and federal level. So for things like the DSP wage increase, for things like assuring that in terms of DD properties are indeed tax exempt, in terms of going to the legislature to try to streamline county board ballot language. Those are the types of things that we do with policy and advocacy, and certainly all the rules that come out of the Department of DD. Next slide. Okay, we can go. So the other thing we do is communications. I am very purposely trying to talk about things other than COVID for purposes of this evening. We do have a special COVID communication, but we have a communications team that I believe excels at distilling large quantities of information into more understandable formats. And this is a very complex system. And for you parents on the board and some of your community members, I think plenty of times I would just want to know what's the most expedient way to help my child and cut through the clutter. And that's where we're trying to take this system. Next slide. We also do professional development twice a year. Some of you have been at our conferences. In the spring, we have a conference, and then our convention is in the, pardon me, in the winter. And this, I would just like to note this past spring, our theme for our conference was to be customer experience. And we were choosing, I'm bringing this up now, I will not belabor the point, but the reason we were going with customer experience is that is how we were going about the diversity and inclusion issue, is by talking about customer experiences and what's it like to be on the other side of a desk from an SSA or a county board superintendent or a provider. And so we will be continuing those themes. In addition to professional development, we also do technical assistance, and that is our fiscal person, everybody from Rick Black. We can go to the next slide, please. So technical assistance is anything for like a board member training, or certainly what Rick Black does in what Lori does with SSA trainings, or what Rick does in terms of working with business managers to assure accuracy and cash forecasts and things like that. So those are the tenets and core pillars of what we do on your behalf. We also have much like you, have a strategic plan. So under those 4 pillars, if we can move to the next slide, please. I would like to talk about our strategic goals. And they can be seen on the very next slide, and they are simplification, sustainability, collaboration, and helping to work with county boards to define themselves as critical members of their community. Many of you have been on the board a while and were part of the Always There campaign in terms of how county boards came to be. And the origins could not be more humble in terms of parents that made this system happen. That the system is really good at adding new things on without taking things away. And I have just often really struggled with what it must be like for a family, number one, trying to cope with life-altering news, and then trying to navigate the system. And so, I believe that pre-pandemic, we were on a march in terms of simplification and sustainability. We are working with a relatively new administration that is the new director is very open to these conversations. And so what I'd like to do is just spend a little time touching on what some of the things that we do in each of these areas and what our intent is in these areas. And so please, again, at any time, please feel free to stop me. I came from outside of the DD system. I've been in my position just about 7 years now. And I had advocated for hospitals for 21 years prior to joining OACB. And, if you're on the board and sometimes are wondering, is this really that complicated? My answer to you is yes, it is. And we have to make it simpler. And I don't want to sound like a broken record, but I just believe we absolutely have to do better. I've spent nearly 30 some years around Medicaid, and yet coming into this universe, again, what is it that people need and want, and how do we get it to them? And so when we talk about simplification, we can look at, in our new 3-year strategic plan, what some of those priorities are. And on the next slide, you will see that as we talk about simplification, what we have learned is it's not just enough to try to simplify something for the sake of simplifying it. It has to be a part of systemic change. And that's why it's taking so long. So You know, in one area that we're thrilled with this new administration is, you know, there have been times where SSAs, and I'm going to talk about SSA turnover and everything we need to be doing to support SSAs, and nearly all these issues that we're talking about are so interchangeable. And so simplification and sustainability, you know, those things impact all elements of the county board. But my point here is just to make sure that we stay focused on the outcomes in terms of what we are simplifying and not adding more barriers. And I think something else that I would really like to get across to you board members tonight is that the first thing you'll hear about this system is there are 88 ways of doing things. I firmly believe for the continued sustainability of county boards, there is going to have to be a greater focus on consistency among county boards. And so, for example, in the next slide, you know, you'll see that one of these things is the implementation of a statewide assessment and a statewide plan. For county children's service agencies in Ohio, all 88 public children's service agencies use the same intake form. And for county boards of DD, there are 88, literally 88 ways of doing things. It makes it hard on families when families move, and it really presents a huge challenge for providers that operate in multiple counties. So, you know, we want to get to the statewide plan, something that's been very positive in terms of trying to look at ways to retain SSAs. We found that there was a lot of duplication sometimes in what SSAs had to enter, double entry, and we're really thrilled that the State Department of DD is willing to work with us on data exchanges so there's not that duplication. So again, we are looking for ways, you know, not to just simplify the system, but we need to make it simpler for families, and we need to retain SSAs, and the community needs to be able to understand what it is that the county boards do. A huge effort with simplification, and man, was the Allen County Board of DD just all over this, but the changes to the wait list. And you all just did a really amazing job. And I think obviously Teresa's SSA experience was really important to that. And so when we talk simplification, it's everything from the wait list to data exchange, and really trying to find ways to streamline the SSA work to focus on people. And we are starting a simplification work group. And while I'm not trying to avoid talking about the pandemic, but we're so excited to get back to some of the work we were doing pre-pandemic. And so this is really a cornerstone for us this year. There are still a lack of options for children and adults who are medically fragile. We had a call with the Ohio Department of Medicaid last week to talk about medically fragile people and what options are available. We've seen, you know, just situations at the local level with Medicaid home care waivers, and they're just over the last about year and a half, they've stopped yanking people off these waivers, but we are still in need of a long-term solution, because what had been happening is if the kids had just a touch of DD and other multiple issues, the effort was to put these kids on DD waivers when really they need to have a waiver that addresses their medical intensity. So those are our efforts around simplification. Teresa, is there anything you would want to add in terms of the Allen County Board's efforts in any of those areas?
Just we sit on the statewide work group testing out the new ISPM assessment. And so it's been kind of nice to be involved right from the go. I mean, everything's kind of been on hold with COVID, but I think they're getting back to that too. So that's probably it.
Very good. So the next cornerstone is around sustainability. You all are very fortunate to have an experienced business manager, which it is, Martha, I don't know if you're there, but it's a very valuable, in terms of the finances at the county board are incredibly complex, and that's another area where we're looking for simplification. Linda has served on the board, Tom serves on the board, and so many of you may have heard this, somewhat ad nauseum. But the fact of the matter is, Ohio is the only state in the nation that funds their DD services through every county having a property tax levy. There are 13 states that do some local money. And those 13 states combined generate just under about $1.7 billion at the county local level. $1 billion of that is from Ohio. And so the challenges in some of these issues is legislators and other decision makers, their first questions are always, well, what are other states doing? But it's really challenging to kind of compare and contrast to other states because of the local funds available in this system. So, one of the things that previous Director Martin really tried to instill was, and I think rightfully so, was fiscal discipline at the county board level. And so we've just hit a first deadline with county boards doing cash projections to the state because we are in this together. And if one county fails, then that puts immense pressure on the state to start picking up waiver match for those counties in fiscal distress, and that puts strain on the entire system. I think that over the next 5 to 6 years, there is going to be a lot of scrutiny on public entities in terms of efficiency and duplication and things of that nature. And so, we are going to be looking at the next generation of shared services. About 8 or 9 years ago, it became somewhat of all the rage for some county boards, particularly in very, very small counties, to share superintendents. That's worked very well in some counties. Other board members, such as yourself, have tried it and decided that they prefer a single superintendent. And so maybe the next generation of shared services, looks like something else, but there is a lot of interest at the State House right now in levy entities that are funded by levy dollars, how those levy dollars are used, and how they're allocated and accounted for. So we need to be cognizant of that. And Allen County, I have to say, Teresa has been, and always very, very professional and appropriately so, but has been Allen County Board of DD has been front and center on this whole DSP provider shortage and workforce crisis in terms of providing leadership among superintendents and others and decision makers about supporting DSPs and providers. We've been in constant contact with the boards throughout this pandemic. And it's been, I've learned a lot just kind of up close seeing how much the superintendents interface with the providers, trying to get things right for people. Lima is not unlike some other, when you have a prison or a community college or an extension, a branch campus, and Union County has Honda, Scott's, a hospital, and a prison. And so some counties, the unemployment rate and whatnot. So we do have an opportunity to support our DSPs, and I know Teresa's been talking, and Martha have been probably talking with you about that. So so also just in terms of, if we go to the next slide, we're trying to, the cash flow forecasts were just submitted to the state, so it's going to be interesting to see how they respond. Dollars are very challenging to come by in the legislature, so we really want to make sure in this last state budget we were able to get $24 million in new funding for EI, mainly around lead poisoning and opiates impacts on babies. But for the next budget, in order to retain those dollars, we need to be able to paint a picture of how those dollars are being used. Any thoughts on sustainability or anything? Obviously here, and again, that enhanced FMAP dollars are going to be a big part of the sustainability conversation, but we're going to be doing some separate slides on the EFMAP. But there will be more federal dollars available to the county boards, so they will be paying less in waiver match. And what's going on behind the scenes right now is our CFO, Rick, is working with the state, and then we'll pull in county board business managers just to talk about the most effective way to get with these enhanced federal dollars so that county boards don't suddenly have these bloated reserve accounts that leave the commissioners kind of scratching their heads. So for example, this morning we had a call with the State County Commissioners Association of Ohio with their staff to educate them about these enhanced funds for pandemic relief.
Can I ask one question?
Of course.
I don't want to go too far down a rabbit hole, but the whole discussion of individuals who were an A being switched to a C, it didn't come before us until today that our providers expect that with their local dollars too, which could cost us about $300,000.
Oh,
and
yeah.
So I asked my peers on the call this morning, and about 6 other counties had already agreed to do that, to say, but we have like limited budgets in that, and the length of time that lasts, of course, is the biggest variable. Do you have any feel on how long that could last?
So we, in terms of agreeing to this, put in 30-day checkpoints. And so what we don't want to happen, because there's more money coming in and fewer people, is providers just saying, let's just keep this going, please. Let's keep it going. And so, Teresa, maybe Lori or Rick had heard that about the local, but I'm going to do an email immediately or a text as soon as I can.
I left a voicemail for Lori, so she doesn't need to call me back.
Okay.
I think for my peers, like it could be where they are financially, but also in Northwest Ohio, it's just us and Lucas County and Wood, as far as similar in size.
Yeah.
And so we kind of ran some quick numbers, and it could quickly get to 300,000. Now, many people are going to say, well, but are all those people going to get back to the workshop? And are all those people, are they really going to go every day? So it really depends on how long that lasts. And if it lasts the entire length of the pandemic, we're in big trouble. If it only lasts 60 days, not so much. And so I just kind of went, and I knew there was a 30-day checkpoint, but gosh, 30 days will be next week already.
Yeah, and well, and the other thing is, and I don't want to get too far down a rabbit hole, but this was adopted, just last week. And so, but it was retroactive to June 1st. The
Right.
Providers wanted retroactive to the beginning of the pandemic, and we were adamant, no, 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 no. But some of them had submitted their billings for like the first week of June, and now they're needing to go back and redo them. And so that's going to slow down being able to kind of take a look at everything. But we are just adamant about these 30-day checkpoints and this being very, very temporary.
We had already offered a grant program to the providers, so they were able to apply up to $4,000 for some of them, and then to now have, oh crap, that they expect to see, because our local contract says we'll pay the waiver rates. And so some of my peers didn't feel, I hadn't thought of it till today when the first one was
I don't-
asked.
It's the first time it's come up. So yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Sorry to get you off track.
No, that's good. But that's why we're here. That's why exactly why we're here, to look into those.
That's exactly what we use them for. Like when something's policy-wise that the state's going, they can listen to all the counties and kind of filter that. So, and they're extremely always willing to listen. Have them in my cell phone, probably 3 of your staff.
I hope so. Okay, another cornerstone is collaboration. And collaboration drives everything that today's county boards have to do. Some of you have been around for a time, perhaps, there was a time when the boards were more self-contained, but the need for the boards to be really, visible in the community now, there's just needs for collaboration on so many levels. One of the things that was really upsetting being new to the system was meeting families who expressed so much frustration about providers and how to pick a good provider. Linda Lehman was on our board during a lot of these conversations. So one of the things that we attempted to do was to collaborate with the provider organizations and the ARC to create like an Angie's List for families. And what we didn't anticipate in all of those conversations, including focus groups with families where somehow this did not come out necessarily, but when put into practice, families were really concerned about retaliation from providers. And so this tool, which was designed to be like an Angie's List for families, is struggling to launch, but we're not giving up on it yet. If you look to the next slide, in terms of our priorities for collaboration, is especially with the changes wrought by the feds. Next slide. You can see, and in terms of some of the things that are just really important for collaboration, and certainly with the community inclusion and conflict of interest directives that have come from the feds, one of the thing that we absolutely have to get right is the SSA case management position. And it's something that Teresa is passionate about at every turn. I heard it, a superintendent not too long ago said, I can't remember the last time we screened a kid with Down syndrome. And then, shortly thereafter, I heard, which is something you never heard superintendents say, and then something else you rarely would hear superintendents say, and it started a couple of years ago, is, and this, the one I'm particularly thinking of was in Northwest Ohio, saying that she'd been in the system for 30 years and SSAs were like lifelong positions and she had never seen the turnover among SSAs. We have to get this right. And let me be very clear on so many levels why this is so important. It is the case management function that is the heart and soul of the county board system. If any of you have any experience with the Adam boards, what happened to the Adam boards years back, you lose the case management function, and there is a fear of county boards becoming automatic teller machines. If you do not have the case management function, you're just getting money out there to providers. And my very first day on the job, the mild-mannered Lori Stanfa, who some of you know, marched into my office and said, what you need to know, and this was long before, this was months before we knew the feds were gonna blow up the system. She came in my office and said, the one thing that you need to know is case management is our line in the sand. And if there are any SSAs in the audience, our commitment is steadfast on this. I have never been an SSA, and I think that I have a helping heart, but I would absolutely struggle with you know, so many of the demands. And I think you know, there are plenty of even SSA superintendents who are now there are now superintendents who were formerly SSAs who can barely recognize the position. And if we're going to have our line in the sand, this case management position, we have to make improvements. And so if you're in the audience, you know, I can't articulate a, you know, complete list to you, but it is a high priority. And we started with the data exchange. We're starting with the simplification because there were a lot of rules and regs that were lifted for the pandemic. And we're using that as a launching pad to say, what rules can we get rid of? What rules need to be modified? And what rules need to get back to the way they were as soon as virtually possible. So, you know, it's, I've had a real, you know, it has just been eye-opening in terms of our daily contact with superintendents, how the intensity of some of the deliberations that the superintendents and the team at the county board have with the providers. And then, you know, another emerging issue is certainly the multi-system youth. And so these are kids that engage in multiple system, typically teenagers, maybe on the spectrum, that interface with a number of different agencies. And we have to do more for these kids and young adults. And that's a high priority, absolutely, as well. So then the last strategic goal initiative is around county boards being critical members of the community. And so, you know, this again is where county boards in the past were maybe a bit more self-contained. They've always been out in the community and part of the community. But really, in terms of the number of, as the counties experience fiscal distress in counties throughout Ohio, we've had boards that have been called in by their budget commissions to reduce their tax levies and roll back their levies. And so we really have a lot of outreach to do. The position of OACB on DD schools is that that is a local decision. And, you know, we are very concerned about the reopening of school and not wanting DD schools just to be tossed in, you know, in one broad brushstroke with everybody else. So we are working with the state on reopening of DD schools. But we've done a lot in terms of outreach with legislators, commissioners, auditors, treasurers, and county leadership in general, because the commissioners control when the county boards can go on the ballot. And we do try to, you know, talk with the counties about living within the culture of their county. There's a small county in Southwest Ohio. Against all odds, they passed their levy. And, you know, so they had a positive cash flow. But their children's services workers hadn't had a raise in something like 10 years. And unfortunately, when they, you know, submitted paperwork for a raise for their staff, the commissioners went a little nuts because they hadn't been able to do anything for children's services. But, you know, it's the county board that runs, you know, not all children's services run levies, only half of them do. Every county board in the state runs a levy. So, you know, if I had a wish, I wish we had the kind of resources where we could do a always there campaign constantly. But we have to build what we learned from that. And so this critical members of the community, it goes into everything from employment to elected officials. And you can see on the next slide, diversity and representation. I talked about this in terms of, customer experience. And this system does lack diversity in a really significant way. And, there's a lot of work we can do in terms of just board governance and presenters and trying to attract more kinds of people to this field. So in terms of, looking to the future, the pandemic has really just reinforced, the county board's ability for perseverance and rallying around people and providers. Just like with every other entity, there was not a roadmap for any of this. So now we're focused, the pandemic is going to be with us. And we are terribly concerned about the reopening of adult day services, non-medical transportation. One of the things that we fought really hard, and you may have heard about it, but there were the provider organizations, or their state association was recommending for non-medical transportation that because in order to be financially viable, they wanted to put people 3 feet apart. And we just refused to accept a lesser standard for people with developmental disabilities. And so, the county boards are going to persevere. We are here to help them navigate the constantly shifting landscape of finances and rules and regulations. And when it all comes down to, we are here to support, and I don't say we, but we OACB, we are here to support the county boards in supporting people with developmental disabilities and their family. It's why the county boards exist. It is why we are here, but we just, we have to tackle this sustainability and the simplicity. So those are, I wanted to leave time for Q&A, and, and perhaps, it's just a touching on highlights of, our strategic plan, and not going through every single element, but did try to, for what Teresa was asking, we do all of this in conjunction with the State Department of DD. Sometimes we're not on the same page, but more often than not, we are. So I am happy to answer any questions that you may have. If you go to the next slide, it's, one of my favorite quotes. Perseverance is one of my favorite words in the English language. So I'm happy to answer questions about anything you may have heard me say, or maybe even more significantly, something I did not touch on.
I don't know that I have anything. The DODD initiatives for this year, have they altered anything because of the COVID situation? Or are they kind of on the same mission?
Yeah, so I think what the department, and they are, I think they're up, I wanted to borrow from their strategic plan for tonight, but I think they're in the process of updating it. They have somebody plotting out every single thing they do. I think the only way in which the pandemic has modified what the department is doing is that they are having to tweak their budget. Mercifully, the waiver allocation line item is safe, so families and people on waivers will not feel the impact of those state budget cuts. But if, for example, of some way in which the pandemic, I'm going to give 2 examples of ways in which the pandemic has modified the department's work plan. And one of those just came out this afternoon, and not in time for me to put it on this. One is something, and I know that you all have lived with, is the 180-day free stay at developmental centers. Because of the state budget implications, they are doing away with that program, which was fairly popular and certainly very much appreciated by boards. Another way in which the department's budget has been modified by the pandemic, or what they're doing has been modified, and this one is unfortunate, is they had allocated $1 million for intermediate care facility programs to treat multi-system youth. And they were hoping to treat 60 kids starting July 1st. And it now looks like that's going to be more like 12 to 20 kids starting this fall. So I think that while the pandemic has not created, wholesale changes for the department, the things like the single service plan, everything's been slightly off track because of that, but I think we'll be getting back on track. But I think we're going to see nips and tucks to their budget, like the things that I just mentioned as examples. Also fully anticipate that the counties are going to be expected with these EFMAP dollars to absorb budget cuts that go into the next fiscal year. And that's where the family support services and things like that become relevant.
Much of that is really known at this point. I mean, the governor made some significant cuts, but it was just through this period, right? I mean, so how much of next year is even known?
No. Can you hear Marty's question?
Absolutely. Yes, sir. And so what's interesting about that is the state did the governor did, and the Office of Budget and Management did somewhat of a masterful job for the current fiscal year, which ends June 30th. Higher ed is really taking some hard cuts in public education, but higher ed is going to end up bearing a brunt of a lot of this, and we're going to see people we know and care about who work in higher ed possibly lose positions. But Marty, to directly answer your question, what makes it tricky is what the Office of Budget and Management has said they are going to do is they are releasing their usually they release a state agency's allocation on July 1, so the agency gets all their money for the year. They are opting to only release allocations in quarterly installments. So I think they're hoping for a quick rebound on tax collections, and the challenging part is by only releasing money in quarterly increments as they're trying to track their tax revenues, then it's really hard to ascertain the full impact of the cuts for the next fiscal year. And what we don't know as of yet is, Senator Huffman, if the legislature is going to get pulled into having to make some of these budget cuts. That's one of the big unknowns at this point. So that is a long-winded non-answer to your question that with these quarterly installments coming out, we're just really not quite sure of what the full impact is going to be.
Well, and being in the middle of the biennium, as you turn the corner in January and start to think about the new one, that's when they'll start to probably make all the heavy cuts.
Yes, and so and so it's but the budget deficit. Coincidentally, the budget deficit is at about $2.8 billion, which coincidentally is about the same size as the rainy day fund.
Oh.
Yeah, and so it's, when Kasich took office, there was only 8 cents in the rainy day fund. That was on the heels of the Great Recession. So I think, there's going to be absolutely zero appetite for raising any kind of tax. So it's going to, be looking at how tax collections increase. But I think the implications of this, we cannot look at this in a silo because it's still really not clear what is happening with primary education, for K through 12. because they got huge budget cuts, but then it sounded like they were maybe mitigated at the federal level. But I'm bringing this up because it's getting harder and harder to pass levies. And so as primary education gets cut, we have a deep concern that schools are going to be going to the ballot sooner, and that has implications for county boards throughout Ohio. We are terribly concerned about the public throwing up their hands with property tax levies and saying this is unsustainable.
That's a valid worry there. Anybody have any questions?
The school districts can go after income taxes rather than property tax levies. Do the county DD boards have that same potential, or are we restricted to property tax levies?
We are absolutely restricted, but actually this region, Region 1, which is the region Allen County Board of EED is in, this region of superintendents has asked us to look at that. Some schools have opted for that route. And so I'd like to say we're emerging from the pandemic. I hope we're emerging from the pandemic because we have, pardon me, work that we absolutely have to get to. But we are going to be retaining somebody to do some modeling on, the feasibility of county boards adding that option. And Tom, you're a farmer. The CAUV property tax values and everything. I can tell you in Franklin County, the appetite for property taxes is getting pretty, for passage of new levies is starting to wane, and we certainly worry about that in rural Ohio as well.
Well, in the farm community, 3-4 years ago, a lot of us saw our real estate property tax double, and because they changed the CAUV, which greatly increased the cropland value, at the same time decreased some of the building value, and that's going to make it tough in agriculture communities to pass levies because of that extreme increase.
Yeah, well, when the Farm Bureau took on the CAUV and the school districts tried to get us to go against the Farm Bureau, I've been around the state house 30-some years, and it's like, nope, we're not
Not fighting farmers.
No, we are not. No, we are not tangling with the Farm Bureau on this, and we did stay out of that because we thought that our thought was that perhaps we could demonstrate kind of more solidarity and support for trying to support.
If you have 3 hours sometime, I can tell you my opinion on property taxes, but
And milk. He'll show you all about milk.
But you know what? It's a classic example of you watch this milk being dumped, and where they're just something's got to give, and yeah. But I would like to talk to you.
It's like the sign over the meat store counter says, because of higher prices, we've had to raise our. Well, there's no shortage of beef, I can tell you. But back to the development centers and stuff like that. One of the concerns I have is when we see, the potential of costing somebody like Allen County, if we'd have 1 or 2 people there, is pretty significant. But if you get to a county who is very tight budget, and they have somebody that needs to go to that, and they're going to be forced to make a decision. Can we afford to send this guy here for 180 days that we're going to have to pay the match now?
Yeah.
Or do we try to deal with somebody that we aren't really capable of dealing with?
Yeah, we heard from a county today down on the river. They have 2 people that are $600,000 waivers, and they're concerned.
Yeah, I get that.
Yeah, and I don't know what the profile is of maybe the Allen County typical 180-day stay person. But sadly, some of these have been kiddos that have absolutely nowhere else to go. And so, hopefully if we can get some of these other options available for kids, that will take some of that pressure off, but that's not addressing everything. And that is something that, we'll like to ask the department to keep that change on the back burner, to be able to, I think they've probably been trying to find a way to get, because it was wildly popular. I think they've been trying to find a way to get rid of it, and this gave them an entree to do that. But we're sad to see it go.
Linda, were you going to ask something?
Yes, Bridget, I had a question about providers. Before the pandemic, it seemed like we were making progress with getting providers' wages increased, and since the pandemic has hit, that all fell by the wayside. Do you see that being pushed forward again in the future? Because that's one of the ways I think it's really important to get the quality of providers up, is to pay a decent wage.
Absolutely. And so, these things, aside from people's loss of function in life, obviously with the pandemic, just from a work standpoint, the single most frustrating part of this whole thing was not being able to get a temporary rate increase for the HPC providers. And the Department of Medicaid simply slammed the door shut on that and said that they couldn't favor one class of providers over another. So Linda, I do think there will be opportunities. There is some federal money, about $147 million. It sounds like there are some strings attached, but there is some temporary relief for DSPs. And then I think because the counties are getting these enhanced dollars through the feds for Medicaid, that, we need to look at ways to ensure that the second part of that wage increase goes into effect on January 1. And so by and large, counties seem to favor using those enhanced FMAP dollars. But we had at least one county that tried to, I don't know if they were talking against the wage increase, but they were like, well, when we were talking about raising the DSP wage increase, unemployment was like at 2%, 3%, and now it's like 20%. So maybe they'll be able to hire more DSPs.
Is that person in our region?
Yes. And that
I
is irrelevant, because we are talking about getting DSPs who care for human beings to $13.23 an hour by January 1, 2021. Amazon and all hospitals are at $15 an hour. And so to have somebody say, well, maybe the unemployment's not so, the unemployment rate is different. Linda, we will not give up on this. And we are doing everything we possibly can to ensure that the race slated for 1/1/21 goes into effect.
And I can speak to that as far as here. We've had multiple people leave being a DSP to go back to their other jobs or to better jobs. Since this happened, I think I just heard today that Marimore Industries, CRSI is the one struggling. So unemployment, I think the economy rebounded so quickly in many ways that we lost several people that went back to other jobs once they opened back up and wages were back up. So I heard him, I heard what he said, and I thought, you've got to be kidding. First of all, like, okay, so we want to get everybody at a bargain basement price is, no.
Right, right, yeah. So, but, we have developed a rigorous verification tool to ensure that money is reaching people. But Linda, no, we cannot, that was tremendously disappointing. It would have provided the HPC providers with a temporary bump. It does look like they are going to be able to get some money from the feds, but we are working to ensure, that we don't fall behind anymore.
Thank you.
And it's something Allen County and Teresa in particular have been very, 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 the superintendents created a bunch of work groups, around some of the pressing issues of the day. And obviously workforce is one of them. And Teresa was very involved with that.
That was the one I chose because I thought it was the most important. We weren't able to find staff for so many things.
And we were making progress, and then the pandemic just blew it all out.
But I think
What I understood of the conversation is they should still get their increase 1/1 of 21 because it's already in the rates and in the law and they have to give it. If I get this wrong, tell me. It's whether the department will give us the money. They had handshook saying, hey, we'll give you that if you approve this. And I would guess that's a no. We're going to have to carry that ball, but I would do that for what this is. Because the ADS providers got nothing but incentives. They were getting checks at the beginning for $85,000, and I had a provider say, "What the department send me $85,000 for?" And then they were the same ones that now are getting the A to C bump. And the whole time, it's the HPC providers that took the COVID risks that kept everybody. And our numbers in Allen are real good, and are definitely in none of our group homes and everything. And I think the staff really took it to heart. And so they were the ones not getting it, whereas there were ADS providers sitting at home doing nothing and getting paid. Okay.
no,
Editorial.
No, but I think the other area where Teresa has been really, and again, we did not coordinate this. I'm just telling you what has transpired as we talk amongst one another. Is it's just not about money; it's about quality. And, we need the money to attract people, in terms of a living wage, but the money piece of it is only one piece of this conversation. How do you know, the company I hired to paint my house last summer, I had to leave for work. So I gave the guy my card and said, call me if you need anything. And he just stared at me. I mean, this is this man in his 50s in his paint garb holding a brush. I handed him my card and he just looked at me and he almost cried. And his daughter is 23 and nonverbal and in the system. And they had just been told that, that she was not going to get a waiver, and you've all lived it. So there's nothing I can tell you that you haven't experienced. But this grown man, when he found out what I did, he started to cry. And they had started their own provider agency because they couldn't find anybody for their daughter, not in Allen County, obviously. It was very humbling, and I'm, to experience that on the family side of the equation, to have this grown man with a painting company well up when I handed him my card, and he because he wasn't happy with what was happening with his 20-some-year-old daughter. And so I bring this up in the context of, yes, it's very important that we march forward on the rate, but there's a quality piece in this as well. Because he went on, and you've all lived it. You've lived this. They hadn't been anywhere in 22 years, and they were tired and they were scared, and their daughter's nonverbal and they didn't know what to do next. So they created their own provider agency. And then the complexity of the billing was the next hurdle. And that's not okay.
We're after 7 now, and to keep to the time, is anything else? I had a gift for you, so I'll have to give it to you the next time I see you. But thank you very much for, even in your illness, finding time to talk to us.
It's like, I am so grateful to have a sinus infection. I tell them I just talked about the Farm Bureau, and they just lost with their longtime lobbyist who's only 48. I'll take this. I even know how to get to the Allen County Board of DD without directions. So, so the absolute best part of my job is getting out into the communities. The last place I went in March, right before the governor shut everything down was Defiance County Board of DD. So I was in your neck of the woods. It's the best part of my job. And again, so many of you have made so many trips to Columbus. I just believe the right thing to do is to be there in person. And so I apologize.
No problem at all. Okay, feel better. We'll
Okay,
let
thanks
you
for
go.
having me in, everybody. I appreciate it. Thanks for your service. Thanks so
Thank
much.
you.
Be safe. Take care.
Thank you.
Thanks all. Take care.
Bye, Chrissy. See you later.
Bye.
I just got noticed that.